7.1 patch has finally dropped for us, and I wanted to take some time to talk about some of the more significant job changes. Obviously, this video is coming out a few days after the patch, so these are not my blind initial impressions, but for the most part they are fairly surface level. I've looked at the changes, I've thought about them, I've played some of them a little bit, though I don't have all of these jobs at level 100, I will openly admit that. My goal with this video is to show off some of the more major changes, talk about why I think they were made, what they do to the job, and then give my thoughts on the changes. Obviously, I'm not an expert on every job, and I'm not going to have the most informed opinion on every single change. That being said, I still understand most jobs in the game well enough that I think I can at least get a conversation started. I'm also not going to talk about every single job change since most of the number tweaks are pretty small and self-explanatory, and honestly if I go down that rabbit hole I'm going to spend like 15 minutes talking about 3 changes that Samurai got, so instead I'm going to focus on the jobs that saw greater changes, the jobs with more noteworthy rotation changes or just job mechanic changes. In no particular order, these are Dark Knight, Gunbreaker, Dragoon, Ninja, Black Mage, and Summoner. Now, just to be clear, the scope of all of these changes isn't exactly the same across all of these jobs. Some are going to be affected by the patch more than others, but of all the changes that were made, I think these are the 6 jobs that probably should be talked about the most. Starting out with Dark Knight, even though this job saw 0 rotation changes, I think this patch has been very notable for Dark Knight players, especially with regards to its mitigation. To be fair though, I think a lot of us kind of saw this coming. Its magic damage defensive tools, Dark Mind and Dark Missionary, now also apply on physical damage at a reduced value. In particular, this tier there were a lot of complaints about Dark Knight's mit since so many of the Savage bosses were dealing primarily physical damage in their busters and raid wides, which made Dark Mind and Missionary kinda just useless a lot of the time. At worst though, especially with regards to Dark Mind, this is a 10% mit on a 60-second cooldown, which is really good when you combine it with all the other mit that tanks have at this point. In addition to this, Abyssal Drain now heals for a surprisingly high 500 cure potency, and they've tacked this on to Carve and Spit as well. Honestly, I think a lot of criticism about Dark Knight's mitigation was kind of blown out of proportion, but now it is inarguably much stronger. Much smaller note, Dark Missionary is now unlocked at level 66, which means we can actually bring it into level 70 ultimates now. And of course, as if all of this weren't enough, Dark Knight received potency increases on both Bloodspiller and its enhanced Delirium combo. I'm honestly pretty surprised at these potency buffs because Dark Knight was not underperforming in damage, and this is kind of a side discussion, but one of the things that makes Dark Knight unique among the other tanks is that it has the ability to burst the hardest under raid buffs out of any tank. At higher levels of play, where playing under and around raid buffs becomes more and more important, this makes Dark Knight very appealing. More potency improvements to its burst in addition to the plethora of mitigation improvements means that I think it's safe to say Dark Knight is looking to be a top contender tank for the upcoming ultimate. Next up though, we've got Gunbreaker, who's also seen some mitigation improvements in addition to some rotation changes, unlike Dark Knight. Aurora, their heal over time OGCD ability, has had its cure potency increased by a surprisingly high 50%, pushing its total cure potency over the regen to 1800. You get 2 charges of this ability and they recover every 60 seconds, and this is not purely a personal defensive, you can give this to whoever you want. I rarely hear people talk about this skill with regards to Gunbreaker, but this seems really good now. The cure potency is straight up higher than White Mage's regen and Astro's aspected benefic. In addition, this is an OGCD, you lose nothing for using this. Additionally, Super Bolide, Gunbreaker's tank invuln, now only drops you to half health instead of 1. This will still trigger the heal potency from your Heart of Corundum, which means that Super Bolide kind of just doesn't have a health cost anymore. Or at the very least, you will never be at risk of immediate death for using this skill again. Similarly to Dark Knight's Dark Missionary, Heart of Light now also works on physical damage at a reduced percent. And then the big change is that Double Down now has a cartridge cost of 1 compared to 2. Because this change, Hypervelocity has had its potency reduced a little bit, but this is definitely a DPS boost for Gunbreaker. Now, I'll just be honest, I'm not a Gunbreaker player, so feel free to take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. I don't understand the intricacies of the rotation, and I don't fully understand the nuance of cartridge spending during your even and odd minute windows. That being said, here's what I can kind of surmise from this change. It seems like your opener doesn't really change too much, you just kind of get an extra burst strike at the end. This won't land in No Mercy, but you can have it fall under your pot. However, that extra GCD, that extra burst strike, will change the GCD that you go into subsequent No Mercy windows with, so your cycles are kind of just different now. Again, I don't know the nuances of cartridge usage, and that was the same before this patch. However, what I do know is that now you only need to spend 2 cartridges to get all of your burst abilities on cooldown instead of 3. This should mean that, in theory, Gunbreaker is now a little more forgiving when it comes to forced downtime and/or the need to disengage from the boss. If for whatever reason you aren't able to generate 3 cartridges for a No Mercy window, you can still at least keep all of your important skills on cooldown with 2. Of course, in order to do this effectively, you're going to need to make rotation adjustments, and that could require a lot of job knowledge, but the option is there. I've never played Gunbreaker in an Ultimate before, and honestly I don't think I'm ever going to, but I can imagine that a change like this gives them more flexibility with their cartridge usage between different phases. It just seems like there's more room for decision making now from the player, which I think is cool, but I'm also not a Gunbreaker player, so I don't really have much of a say in how this actually feels. I'll just leave that up to the Gunbreakers. Next up we've got Dragoon, who has also seen a notable change to its rotation. First of all, Piercing Talon, its filler ranged attack, has been buffed, and now if you execute Elusive Jump, it will increase its potency to a surprisingly high 350. This is pretty similar to Samurai's enhanced NP, but of note, the 350 potency of this now pushes it higher than both the first and second hit of Dragoon's combo sequences. This means that there are now niche situations where it might be worth it to use one of these instead of a standard combo GCD. Additionally, and I think this is kind of funny, we now have an enhanced Piercing Talon opener for Dragoon, where you actually pre-pull Elusive Jump and then use this to pull the boss with. However, with that out of the way, let's get to the major change Dragoon received this patch. After executing Gear Skogul, you now get 1 usage of Nastrond instead of the 3 that you'd get before. Potency values around its burst has been adjusted to accommodate for this, but overall you have 2 less weaves every single 1 and 2 minute window. Some players might enjoy this overall, but personally, I actually really liked spamming Nastron during Dragoon's burst phase. Especially with the way it was implemented in Dawntrail, you never really risked drifting it, and you could kinda just spam it whenever you had a free OGCD slot. But now you get 1 Nastrond as a follow-up from Gear Skogul, and this makes the OGCD much more similar to pretty much the rest of Dragoon's OGCDs with the rework. Press damage OGCD, get follow-up, make sure to use follow-up under personal buffs. The important thing to track on Dragoon was the cooldown of the first OGCDs that you're pressing. Those ones can actually drift, while their follow-ups cannot. Playing Dragoon properly means preventing these initial cooldowns from drifting and then weaving in your follow-ups as needed, making sure to keep everything tightly knit under your burst. Basically, get all your stuff on cooldown, and then when you do so, you can start mashing the follow-ups. Now, my understanding is that previously, before patch 7.1, the weave slots for Dragoon actually got pretty tight, especially on later even minute windows. Having less weave slots does make it a little bit more forgiving, because if you do end up drifting some of your hard cooldowns over a fight, having less Nastrons to worry about does give you more weaving room to get those skills back on cooldown. At the same time though, the burst windows feel a lot more empty now at times. I guess to be fair, I really haven't played Dragoon very much this expansion, and honestly it still felt okay from the couple of experts and stuff that I've run it in. I'll probably make a bigger video on the Dragoon rework at some point once I've had a little bit more time with it, but my current impressions are a little bit mixed, to be honest. Alright, this is a big one. Players can now move while under the effect of Tenchi Jin. This doesn't change Ninja's rotation directly at all, but this change has single-handedly turned this ability from a 2-minute cooldown that you need to plan around every burst window into straight up the most free fucking uptime you could ask for. On top of some potency increases to Dream Within a Dream, Ninja is looking to be extremely powerful, end of story. Throwing Daggers also received a potency buff, which shouldn't really matter, and Dokomori, the new upgrade for Mug, will now cleave in a cone. The biggest change, of course, was to Tenchi Jin, and regardless of whether or not you like it, the job is inarguably going to be stronger as a result. I think it's more than safe to say Ninja is looking to be very strong in the upcoming Ultimate. Next up is Black Mage, who probably got the flashiest changes. First of all, Flare's cast has been reduced to 3 seconds, so that helps your AoE. And the 2 big changes, both of which we knew about beforehand, you now have 2 charges of Leyline, and Despair is now instant cast at level 100. Enochian has been nerfed very slightly, but this is obviously going to be a damage increase to Black Mage. At surface level, these changes are pretty straightforward, but the effects that they're going to have on Black Mage's rotation is a lot more complicated and nuanced. The leyline change in particular is pretty big and is going to give Black Mage a lot more depth when it comes to fight-specific optimization. You'll still aim to fit one in 2 minutes as per usual, but now you get an extra leyline to work with outside of your burst windows, so it's going to be really interesting to see how Black Mage players use these across different fights. The Despair change is nice, I guess, but Flare Star is still exactly the same, and honestly, I really don't like the way that Flare Star was implemented this expansion. But this topic has already been talked to death by other Black Mage players who are way more talented at the job than I am. I am optimistic that both of these changes will help breathe some more creativity into the job again, but Flare Star as it is right now is still a big restriction on your fire phase flexibility. I've got my fingers crossed that Black Mages will come up with some crazy cool bullshit from all this, but it still seems like a far cry from Endwalker Black Mage, and it's pretty clear unfortunately that we're never going back. Finally, even though this is a bit of a smaller change compared to some of the other jobs, I did want to talk about the summoner adjustments. First and foremost, it has received some general potency increases across the board, but the significant change here is the adjustment to Crimson Cyclone and Crimson Strike. These are your two Astral Flow GCDs from your Ifrit phase. Previously, these GCDs were a combo sequence. You would have to perform one after the other, otherwise you would lose the second one. Now, however, you can use the first one, cast your 2 Ruby Rites, and then use the second one. Additionally, you can also use Ruin 4 and even Ruin 3 and Tri-Disaster between these. The patches state that the effect ends upon the execution of certain summoner actions, and this wording is a little bit vague, but this is specifically when you're leaving your Ifrit phase. So long as you're still in the Ifrit phase, you can use whatever GCDs you currently have access to, so this actually gives you a lot more flexibility with your Ifrit phase. I honestly really don't like the summoner rework we got in Endwalker, but this is a change that I think they should have had a long time ago. I can understand the argument that a change like this simplifies summoner even more and makes it even easier to play, but the reason I'm not opposed to a change like this is because it gives you more control over your rotation. You now have more decision points in your Ifrit phase, and I think that's cool personally. That being said, I still wish they would have done more with Summoner this expansion, and I'm not really sure how it's going to compare to Pictomancer even with these buffs. I do think this was a positive change though. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the new battle content we got as well. I think the new dungeon was okay, and I actually really enjoyed the new Alliance raid. I think it was really fresh and exciting. I thought the new EX was a lot of fun too. I had a good time progging through it, and I feel like overall, they are taking steps forward when it comes to encounter design. And honestly, at the end of the day, encounter design is the focus of raiding in this game. The job design is very carefully molded to conform to the encounter design. Even if I'm a little bit split on some of the job adjustments this patch, we're almost certainly going to see some follow-up number tweaks in the 7.11 patch right before Future's rewritten, so I guess we'll see what happens next week. As I mentioned earlier, there were some other jobs that received smaller changes too, but these were the ones that I felt were the most important to talk about. I'll link the patch notes in the description below for anyone who hasn't checked them out yet, and that's all I've got, so thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.